The fluorescent lights of the Jack Harwell Detention Center flicker with a dull, clinical hum, the kind that echoes endlessly through concrete hallways and steel-barred holding pods. It is here, inside this unassuming jail in Waco, Texas, where the story begins, not with a dramatic escape, not with a high-speed chase, but with a beating delivered in a moment of cold calculation. On a March afternoon in 2023, Travis Lee Leighton, a documented member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, walked across a pod floor with a purpose that only men immersed in prison gang life truly understand. His target was a fellow inmate, a man named Flavio Barrera Alvarez. The attack, though brief, was brutal. Surveillance cameras captured the strike, sudden, sharp, and executed with a sense of confidence that comes only from years of navigating violence. Leighton cornered Alvarez near a wall, driving fists into him with a surgically precise rhythm. Blows fueled not by impulse, but by intent. Guards intervened quickly, separating the men and dragging each back into the oppressive architecture of incarceration. On its surface, the incident seemed like another eruption of jailhouse hostility. But for prosecutors in McLennan County, it was much more. A chance to finally secure a conviction that would keep a repeat violent offender locked away for decades. Within days of the assault, charges escalated dramatically. Leighton was indicted for aggravated assault as a habitual criminal, a charge that, under Texas law, carried a potential sentence of 25 years to life. Prosecutors believed they finally had him cornered. After years of standoffs, weapons charges, escapes, and gang affiliations, this beating was going to be the case that finally stuck. For the first time in nearly 2 decades of criminal behavior, Leighton was staring directly into the possibility of life behind bars. But the criminal justice system, especially when it intersects with federal agencies, is rarely straightforward. The victim, Alvarez, was not just an inmate, he was a detainee in ICE custody, caught in the machinery of immigration enforcement. And shortly after the assault, before prosecutors could build the airtight case they needed, Immigration and Customs Enforcement made a decision that would unravel everything. They deported him. With one administrative motion, Alvarez was escorted onto a plane and removed from the country entirely. When local prosecutors realized the victim was gone, without testimony, without in-person identification, without the cooperative presence required for a major violent felony case, their entire strategy began crumbling. In courtrooms across the United States, violent crime prosecutions rely heavily on victim testimony. Without it, even video footage can fail to meet evidentiary thresholds. And so, what had once been a life sentence case began shrinking, collapsing under the weight of procedural complications. Defense attorneys immediately seized on the gap. They argued that without the victim's presence, prosecutors could not prove the aggravated assault charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The more time passed, the more obvious it became that the state had lost the key piece of its puzzle. By mid-2024, the case that once threatened to end Leighton's freedom took a dramatic turn. Rather than face trial for a felony that could have locked him away for decades, Leighton accepted a plea deal. The charge was reduced to a simple Class A misdemeanor assault, punishable by only 365 days in jail. But even that sentence carried little weight. It was to be served concurrently with a federal prison term he was already completing for weapon possession. In other words, the punishment changed nothing. The jailhouse attack, once a potential life sentence event, became a footnote in his already long record. For those who had watched Leighton's criminal trajectory for over 15 years, Officers, prosecutors, even former associates, the outcome was infuriating yet familiar. This was not the first time he had slipped through the cracks of an overburdened, fragmented justice system. Each time a case seemed poised to deliver long-term consequences, something intervened. A missing witness, a paperwork error, overlapping jurisdictions, or simple administrative oversight. To many, Leighton's life seemed like a pattern of near misses, a man orbiting the possibility of long-term imprisonment without ever fully being pulled into its gravitational center. As the misdemeanor plea was finalized in July 2024, Leighton appeared in court unshaken, perhaps even unsurprised. Men who spend years inside prison gangs understand how the system works. They know the pressure points, they know the weaknesses, they know how fragmented bureaucracy can become its own defense. And Leighton, now seasoned by years under the flag of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, seemed to understand this instinctively. But this assault and the legal collapse that followed was not an isolated event. It was part of a far larger story, a story that began long before the walls of the Jack Harwell Detention Center ever closed around him. To understand why this attack happened, why prosecutors were so determined to secure a major conviction, and why Leighton continues to be a figure of interest among both state and federal authorities, the documentary must pull back the lens. It must explore the decades that shaped him, the criminal beginnings, the gang indoctrination, the escalating confrontations with law enforcement, and the violent cycles that pulled him deeper into a world defined by white supremacist ideology and prison power structures. This is not simply the story of a jailhouse assault. It is the story of a man molded by a lifetime of criminality, guided by the influence of one of Texas's most feared prison gangs, and repeatedly propelled through the cracks of a justice system unable to contain him. And as the camera pulls away from the silent pod where the 2023 attack unfolded, the narrative shifts backward in time, toward the forces that sculpted Travis Leighton into the man who delivered that brutal beating on a jail floor. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is not a street gang in the traditional sense. It is a structured, highly organized prison syndicate built on racial ideology, discipline, and the ruthless enforcement of its own internal codes. By the time Travis Lee Leighton's name began surfacing in police reports as a confirmed member, the ABT had already spent decades building a reputation as one of the most violent and uncompromising criminal organizations in the Texas prison system. To understand Leighton's behavior, one must first understand the world he willingly stepped into. A world where violence is currency, loyalty is survival, and defiance is met with swift, often lethal consequences. Founded in the early 1980s, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas originated not as an extension of the California-based Aryan Brotherhood, but as a separate entity shaped by Texas prisons and their uniquely volatile racial dynamics. The gang emerged during a period of intense desegregation and rising inmate violence, when protection packs became essential for survival. But protection was only the beginning. Over time, the ABT evolved into a cartel-like organization, controlling extortion networks, narcotics pipelines, and contract assaults both inside and outside of prison walls. Its members followed a rigid hierarchy, pledged to a lifetime commitment, and adhered to a strict code where betrayal was often punishable by death. For men like Leighton, young, already entangled in the criminal justice system, and drifting toward increasingly violent offenses, the ABT offered a sense of belonging, power, and purpose. Many who join prison-based gangs do so not out of ideological conviction, but necessity. Isolation, fear, and the need for allies create conditions where the promises of a powerful group become seductive. Once inside, however, the line between necessity and loyalty blurs. Violence becomes normalized. Order becomes dictated by gang hierarchy rather than prison administration. And any step away from the group is seen as treason. Leighton's alignment with the ABT explains much about his behavior throughout his criminal trajectory. From fleeing traffic stops to engaging in armed confrontations, he operated with an intensity that mirrored the ethos of the Brotherhood: confront, resist, dominate. His arrests repeatedly came with details that fit the gang's profile: firearms, body armor, aggressive resistance, and a near-constant readiness for conflict. By the time he reached the Jack Harwell Detention Center in the 2020s, he was not just another inmate. He was a soldier within a racially motivated criminal enterprise. Inside facilities like Jack Harwell, gangs exert subtle but powerful control. They monitor who comes in and who goes out, who owes money, who violates rules, and who must be disciplined. Nor are racial politics merely peripheral. They are embedded in the very structure of daily life. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, like the Texas Syndicate or the Mexican Mafia, views assaults not as random acts of rage, but as tools of governance. Whether the 2023 attack ordered by the gang, approved by leaders, or simply carried out to enforce discipline, one fact remains: it aligned perfectly with the Brotherhood's pattern of targeted violence. Experts familiar with the gang describe actions like Leighton's assault on Alvarez as typical of ABT enforcement. These beatings serve multiple functions: settling debts, enforcing silence, punishing perceived disrespect, or establishing dominance within a pod. The violence is often swift, deliberate, and performed with the understanding that the consequences are part of the code. To an outsider, the assault looks brutal. To an initiated member, it looks routine. Understanding this context is critical to understanding why prosecutors saw the 2023 assault as more than just another jailhouse fight. They believed the attack had deeper implications, gang implications, and that convicting Leighton on a major felony might disrupt ABT influence inside the facility. Removing a known member from circulation, particularly one with a history of escalating violence, could weaken internal gang cohesion. But the legal system, constrained by procedural requirements and dependent on witness cooperation, is often no match for the calculated nature of organized inmate violence. The assault was designed to leave marks, not answers. It imposed injury, but not clarity. Life inside the ABT is shaped by a paradoxical mixture of order and savagery. Members follow structured rules and established ranks, yet the gang survives by committing unpredictable acts of aggression. The Brotherhood's leadership is decentralized, with units operating across various prisons, county jails, and federal institutions. This makes the organization extremely difficult for authorities to dismantle. Every time a leader is removed, another steps forward. Every time a lower-ranking member is incarcerated, he becomes positioned for recruitment or deeper involvement. And every time someone like Leighton commits an assault, it does not weaken the gang. It reinforces its internal system of control. Long before the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas claimed him, before his name appeared in gang files or federal sentencing documents, Travis Lee Leighton was a teenager, drifting into the criminal world with small but telling missteps. His story does not begin with a major violent crime or a dramatic shootout, but with a pattern recognizable to any criminologist: early offenses, escalating risks, and a gradual hardening of behavior as the criminal justice system becomes less an intervention and more an environment he adapts to. By the time the prison gangs entered the picture, the trajectory had already been set in motion. Leighton's documented criminal path began in 2005, when he was just 19 years old. In that year, he was sentenced to 18 months in state jail for the burglary of a building. For many offenders, an early conviction like this serves as a crossroads, an opportunity to change direction or sink deeper. For Leighton, it became the first brick in a long corridor of confinement. The burglary was not remarkable on its own, but it offered a first glimpse into his developing criminal mindset. Entering property unlawfully, taking what wasn't his, and doing so with the confidence of someone already familiar with risk. That familiarity would grow quickly. Following his release, Leighton did not distance himself from the criminal behavior that led him into the system. Instead, he continued drifting in and out of trouble, each incident more severe than the last. His defining moment in these early years came in 2007, during a routine traffic stop in Temple, Texas. When officers attempted to pull him over, Leighton fled. The chase did not last long. He abandoned the vehicle and fled on foot. But what the officers found inside the car would later become a pivotal piece of evidence in shaping his criminal history: a handgun and body armor. Possession of a firearm by a felon is already a serious offense, but the presence of body armor signaled something more: a preparedness for violent confrontation, a willingness to engage with police or rival criminals, or at the very least, a growing comfort with tools associated with high-risk criminal activity. Though the charges related to the 2007 incident did not immediately land him in long-term custody, the repercussions would echo through his record years later, ultimately forming the basis of a major conviction in 2012. The gap between 2007 and 2012 tells a story of instability and continued run-ins with the law. By the time Leighton resurfaced in major court proceedings, he had become a familiar face to local enforcement agencies. His criminal behavior was no longer episodic. It had become habitual. When he appeared in court in August 2012, prosecutors laid out the details of the firearm and body armor offense that had originated years earlier. This time, there would be no fleeting escape or short jail stay. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The timing of that sentence reveals another layer of his downward spiral. Leighton had been released from state jail less than 5 months earlier for a previous offense. Rather than using that time to stabilize, reconnect, or rebuild, he immediately plunged back into behavior that guaranteed his return to custody. Recidivism experts often point to the first 6 months after release as the most critical period. An individual either adapts to freedom or gravitates back toward the forces that shaped their incarceration. In Leighton's case, the transition was almost instantaneous. Prison had not frightened him. It had conditioned him. During this 2012 incarceration, Leighton matured not into rehabilitation, but into the mindset of a man becoming increasingly comfortable with confinement. The Texas prison system is a world divided by race, alliances, and hierarchies. Young inmates without protection often find themselves pressured or persuaded into joining groups that promise survival, structure, and belonging. For white inmates, especially those with violent tendencies or existing criminal reputations, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is one of the most powerful forces inside the system. Though the exact date of Leighton's formal association remains unclear, investigators and gang intelligence units later identified him as a confirmed member, an indication that by this time his path had intersected with the Brotherhood's influence. His behavior in these years reflects the transformation taking place. Small-time thefts had given way to armed offenses. Fleeing police had escalated into standoffs. The young man who once burglarized a building now showed the hallmarks of a criminal adopting the posture of a combatant, prepared, entrenched, and increasingly aggressive. The 2012 sentence did not break this trajectory. Instead, it deepened it. Prison is often described as a crucible, a place that either reforms or reforges. For Leighton, it reforged. As his 4-year sentence progressed, he became more enmeshed in prison culture. Surrounded by gang influence, shaped by repeated exposure to violence, and hardened by years of institutional living, he emerged not as a man dissuaded from crime, but as a man ready to engage with it more fully. The repeated exposures to control, conflict, and confinement were no longer shocking. They were becoming normal. And when he would later face police again, he would do so not with the panic of a young man fearing prison, but with the defiance of someone who had learned to navigate it. By the time his 2012 sentence concluded, Leighton had evolved into something more volatile than the teenager who first entered the system. His early crimes had laid the groundwork. His time in prison had shaped his loyalties and his identity. And the world he was entering, both inside and outside of custody, was about to push him into even more dangerous territory. His next major encounter with law enforcement would not be a simple arrest. It would be a standoff that brought the full weight of police tactical units to his doorstep and solidified his reputation as a volatile, heavily armed, and increasingly unpredictable offender. By the time September 2014 arrived, the name Travis Lee Leighton was no longer just another entry in Central Texas arrest logs. After years of repeated arrests, escalating confrontations, and a growing presence in the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, he had become a known figure to local agencies. Volatile, heavily armed, and deeply entrenched in criminal life. What happened next would cement his reputation for years to come. A prolonged 7-hour standoff with the Killeen Police Department that marked the most dramatic and dangerous moment of his criminal career. It began, like many of Leighton's confrontations with the law enforcement, with what should have been a simple traffic stop. Officers initiated it for routine reasons. Nothing dramatic, nothing that signaled an impending crisis. But Leighton was not a routine suspect. Unknown to the officers at the time, he had outstanding warrants, including a felony warrant for violating parole. He knew that if he was taken into custody that day, it wouldn't be a short-term inconvenience. It could mean years behind bars. And for a man already steeped in the defiant posture of gang life, surrender was not an option he entertained easily. When officers approached, Leighton refused to comply. Words escalated into tension. Tension escalated into confrontation. And soon he retreated into a residence, locking the door behind him. What followed was a situation that shifted rapidly from a simple stop to a full tactical operation. Police surrounded the home. Crisis negotiators arrived. An armored vehicle rolled into position. The neighborhood was cordoned off as officers attempted to assess the threat inside. Leighton, armed and barricaded, settled into a standoff that would stretch into the evening hours. These are the moments where a man's criminal evolution becomes most visible, not in the quiet entries of a rap sheet, but in the decisions made under pressure. Instead of surrendering, Leighton chose defiance. Instead of de-escalation, he chose confrontation. Officers familiar with ABT members will often note that the gang cultivates a warrior mentality, teaching its affiliates to stand their ground and resist law enforcement. Whether driven by ideology, fear, ego, or a mixture of all three, Leighton embodied that mentality inside the barricaded home. Police negotiators attempted communication. They urged surrender. Hours passed. Leighton refused. During the standoff, officers had every reason to believe he was armed. His past arrest involving firearms and body armor heightened the urgency of the situation. Any wrong move could turn deadly, not only for the officers surrounding the house, but for Leighton himself. The Brotherhood's culture of defiance often ends in shootouts, and many ABT members have died in similar confrontations over the years. Police understood the stakes clearly. Every passing hour carried the risk of an explosive end. 7 hours is an eternity in a barricaded standoff scenario. Neighbors waited anxiously behind police lines. Tactical teams rotated positions, maintaining readiness. Flashbang grenades were prepared. Officers took turns at shields, scanning for movement inside the home. Negotiators cycled through strategies, coaxing, warning, reasoning. But one factor remained constant. Leighton did not come out. The question that arises in hindsight is a simple one. What was he thinking? For some barricaded suspects, the decision not to surrender emerges from panic or intoxication. For others, it is a calculated attempt to intimidate or negotiate. But for gang-affiliated offenders with a history of violent defiance, the mindset is different. Many believe that surrender is a form of weakness, a betrayal of the identity they have built through years of conflict. Leighton's behavior suggested a man more concerned with maintaining control, even briefly, than with mitigating the consequences he faced. The standoff allowed him, if only symbolically, to push back against the authority that had been chasing him for most of his adult life. Ultimately, Leighton's resistance ended not in gunfire or tragedy, but in exhaustion. As police tightened their perimeter and expanded tactical measures, the standoff reached a breaking point. After 7 tense hours, Leighton was taken into custody. Officers found him physically drained, the adrenaline spent, the defiance that held him in place slowly dissolving under the weight of inevitability. But while the standoff ended without loss of life, its impact resonated far beyond that day. For law enforcement, the incident confirmed what many already suspected. Leighton was no longer just a repeat offender. He was a man increasingly willing to risk violence, confront officers, and escalate encounters. The incident placed him firmly within the classification of high-risk, volatile individuals, suspects whose future interactions with police would be approached with heightened caution. For prosecutors, it became another piece of evidence in the mosaic of a career criminal who consistently demonstrated his danger to the community. And for the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, the standoff served as its own kind of signal, proof that their affiliate was capable of the kind of high-stakes defiance the gang often glorified. Leighton's 2014 arrest concluded with him returning to custody, where he spent the following years serving sentences tied to his various offenses. But incarceration did not bring an end to the instability that had defined his life. Instead, it marked the transition into the next phase, one in which his criminal history, gang associations, and volatile behavior would intersect yet again with the justice system, leading ultimately to the jailhouse assault that reopened the door to severe punishment. The seeds planted in the 2000s had grown, and now the consequences of those choices were becoming impossible to escape. By the early 2020s, Travis Leighton was no longer a peripheral figure in the margins of local police blotters. He was a man whose record had begun to accumulate the kinds of convictions that draw federal attention. Weapons and body armor found during a 2007 traffic stop, the 2012 felon in possession conviction, and the pattern of violent resistance to law enforcement painted the picture prosecutors feared most: an entrenched offender prepared for armed confrontation. Federal authorities ultimately secured a weapons conviction that sent Leighton into the federal system, a sentence that would become the backdrop for the next, more consequential chapter of his life. Rather than isolating him from the criminal world, incarceration placed him into the very environment where gang authority is forged, tested, and sometimes amplified. The twist that reshaped the case was administrative and geopolitical rather than evidential. Immigration and customs enforcement moved to deport Avilés. Within weeks of the assault, the victim was removed from the country, placed on a plane, and taken out of the reach of local prosecutors. Without the victim present to testify, identify his attacker in court, or cooperate with the state's narrative, the felony case, built as much on witness testimony as it was on video, lost the foundation prosecutors needed to pursue a life sentence conviction. Defense lawyers seized on the inability to secure in-person testimony. Even when surveillance footage existed, courts and juries demand confirmation beyond digital images. The absence of Avilés was not a minor setback. It was a legal fulcrum that tipped the case away from its most consequential outcomes.